The CDC is back. They got paired papers in MMWR that claim to show what we've all been waiting for. Mandatory masking policies within schools works. 100% it works. Well, based on these observational studies, that's what the authors would have you believe. But these observational studies have a number of limitations, a number of caveats, and I've described some of them on my Substack, which you should check out if you haven't already. But I want to talk about them a little bit more here. I want to also talk about a New York Times op-ed by the authors of the Bangladesh cluster randomized trial. Now, what are the points I want to make? Here's a few points. When there are policy decisions that you make that you don't know the answer to, there are ways to get at the answer. And probably the best way for most policy decisions, particularly decisions around NPIs, is a cluster randomized control trial. That's where you take a big group of people who really don't know the answer and you break them out into clusters. That could be classrooms, it could be schools, it could be small little regions, and you assign one of those pockets, one strategy, and the other pocket not to do that strategy or a different strategy, and you expand that to all the different groups you got. And so suddenly you're capable of answering interesting questions. And that's literally what they did in Bangladesh, which we'll come to. They randomized those groups, those villages, to cloth masking, to surgical masking, or to no masking at all. That's very, very useful. Now, finally, they're able to separate the effect of the masking from all the other things that may make a group of people want to mask. Now, it turns out, I don't know if you know this, but brace yourself. Masking school kids is kind of controversial in this country. I don't know if you knew that. But it's kind of controversial. And it has taken on a political valence. People in left-leaning and blue states, they like to do it. And people in right-leaning and red states, they don't like to do it. They don't like those mandates. And they're more likely to say this is unproven, and these people are more likely to say we know for sure it works. So it's got this left-right dimension. It turns out that politics has also infiltrated other aspects of SARS-CoV-2. The people over here may be more likely to do a whole bunch of other things to keep themselves from getting the virus. And the people over here may be less likely to do those other things and more likely to do other activities that they feel are salutatory. So there are some differences here. Enter the two CDC studies. One study takes place in Maricopa County and Pima County, Arizona. And those are both places that are politically divided. Pima County, of course, voted more strongly in favor of Joe Biden. Maricopa was kind of split this time between Trump and Biden. And they looked to see what happened to the schools there. And it turns out that the schools in these counties that implemented mask policies were less likely to have 2 or more cases in the school than schools that didn't implement the mandatory mask policy. Now, what about, did the mandatory mask policy slow the total number of cases? Oh, we don't know the answer to that question, actually. Don't know the answer to that question because the study doesn't actually report the number of cases in these schools. Well, were the schools with mandatory mask policies the same as the schools without mandatory mask policies? Well, they were smaller and more likely to be elementary school, and they were more likely to be in Pima County and not in Maricopa County. But other than that, they were really rather different than the schools that didn't implement the policy. And if you look at that, and you look at 2 or more cases, then there's a 3.5 odds ratio or fold reduction in the risk of 2 or more cases if you were in the mask mandate group versus the group that didn't have the mask mandate. So what am I to take from this? I take what I generally take from these kinds of studies, which is I have absolutely no clue. These are different schools than these schools, and that these different schools had fewer 2 or more cases, although I don't actually know the raw numbers of cases. And if a school is bigger, well, I would think statistically, even at the same rate of having cases, they're more likely to be 2 cases, and those bigger schools are in this hand over here, the ones without the mask mandates. The other thing they don't adjust for is the rates of vaccination among teachers and students. They don't adjust for a continual adjustment for the population transmission in that area. That's kind of a problem. The paired paper in the MMWR looked at all the counties in America, and they divide them into counties with strong school masking policies, like you got to do it always, and counties where there is a strong no masking policy. You don't got to do it, and if you don't want to do it. And it turns out only 16% of schools are in those 2 buckets. Most schools, 84%, are in some mixed district where some people do it, some people mandate it, some people don't. And if you compare these 2 districts, you start to see that the change in cases after school starts was different. What are the raw numbers of cases? Can you adjust it for pediatric and teacher vaccination? Well, they didn't do any of those things. The bigger problem here is that these kinds of studies are very similar to the studies that we dismiss for ivermectin, for hydroxychloroquine. These are really confounded observational studies. The people doing one thing are very different than the people who don't do the other thing. They're not really useful for causal conclusions in policy. What am I to think when many people on Twitter start to retweet these studies? When many people say these studies prove what we've known all along? What am I to think? The only thing I can think is that people are very, very biased. They have a double standard. If they wanted something to work, they will extol the worst data imaginable. And if they don't want it to work, they won't accept the best data imaginable. Let's talk about the cluster randomized trial in Bangladesh. This is a randomized trial. It's a cluster randomized trial. It's a good study. It's really good. It does give us important information. Does that information apply to the U.S. now? Does it apply to schools? I think not. We're not Bangladesh when the study was run. When the study was run in rural Bangladesh, Bangladesh essentially had no vaccination and no seroprevalence at baseline. We're a little bit different in the United States. I don't know if you know this. We have high vaccination. 65% of people have gotten one shot. In some places, it's really high, like San Francisco. And natural immunity, we don't know for sure, but different studies put it in the 20% ballpark. So we're not the same as Bangladesh when this study was run. But nevertheless, when the study was run, they found that places that instituted surgical masks had a lower rate of spread. That's good. But places that instituted cloth masks, they had no reduction in spread over the control arm of no masks. Cloth masks fail, surgical masks win in Bangladesh in these settings. That's good to know. That's very important information. But what does the op-ed state? The op-ed states that any mask is better than no mask. That's not what your study showed. That's kind of a misinterpretation of your study. It's kind of misinformation. It's kind of not true. That's not what your study said. It didn't say any mask was better than no mask. It said one mask won, and the other mask was, in fact, not better than no mask by your own primary endpoint. So why are you saying that? The authors of this op-ed also write that if we did this now in the United States right now, we'd save so many lives. Well, that would be if the effect size directly translated to the United States right now. It does not. Why does it not? Because it's a very different time and place than when you ran your study. So what am I to think? We allow so many things in science that are just patently incorrect. Both of these studies that don't prove causality. This op-ed that's saying things that are just not true, not shown by the evidence. But it's unidirectional. It's only if that's the prevailing wisdom. You get away with it. You try to say anything that goes against the grain, you're going to be fact-checked 4 times. I happen to know something about that. So these are my thoughts on these studies. They don't actually prove what they claim to be showing. They are kind of, the kinds of studies that get done that I wish we had fewer of. And what's more emblematic to me is all the ways in which the tweets and retweets and likes have been weaponized. This topic is really, it's in a bad place. Like, I don't know how many scientists are left on this topic. There are a lot of partisans who feel very strongly that they know the answer. And there's like 6 people who are willing to admit like we didn't run a whole lot of cluster trials that we should have. And it's kind of a sad state for science. So if you like this video, like, subscribe, leave a message, comment. Those are my thoughts on these 2 studies. Check out the Substack. A lot more writing in there for you. Until next time.